Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. Our Bible teacher will be Gunther von Haringa Sr. In this series of studies, we will be focusing on the book of Judges. Without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. This is going to be part 8 in the book of Judges. And I'd like to recap what we've learned so far in the book of Judges, and particularly as it might relate to this principle of by little and little, which God employs in allowing the Israelites to dispossess the inhabitants of the land. These are those seven, what was left of the seven remaining heathen nations in the land of Canaan. The first thing that we want to keep in mind is that in the book of Judges, there is a distinct pattern of rebellion, oppression, deliverance, and rest. And we see this very explicitly in Judges 2, 8 through 19. Judges 2, 8 through 19. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Jehovah, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the mount of Ephraim, on the north side of the hill Gaash. And also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not Jehovah, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of Jehovah, and served Baalim. And they forsook Jehovah God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked Jehovah to anger. And they forsook Jehovah, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of Jehovah was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of Jehovah was against them for evil, as Jehovah had said, and as Jehovah had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, Jehovah raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a-whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of Jehovah, but they did not so. And when Jehovah raised them up judges, Jehovah was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented Jehovah because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. Verse 19, and it came to pass when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. And, it's remarkable that God repeats their going after other gods 4 times in this passage to really drive home the point that they really were committing the first and or actually they were really breaking the first and greatest commandment of all, which was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with all thy strength. Secondly, because they did not completely destroy these nations as God had commanded them, God told them that he would afflict them, according to Numbers 33, 55, and 56, and the parallel passage to that, which is Joshua 23:13. So God solemnly warned them in Numbers 33, 55, and 56. And there we read, but if ye will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which ye let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherein ye dwell. Moreover, it shall come to pass that I shall do unto you as I thought to do unto them. And then we'll go to Joshua 23:13. Joshua 23, verse 13. Know for a certainty that Jehovah your God will no more drive out any of these nations from before you, but they shall be snares and traps unto you, and scourges in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until ye perish from off this good land which Jehovah your God hath given you. And so again, we see where God told them exactly what he would do to them as a result of their rebellion. And we've discussed these 5 judgments that he brought upon them. And it really has to do with spiritual blindness and deception. And because they failed to drive out all these nations quickly, as God had told them, then he decided to prove Israel, or to test Israel, by keeping them there in the land, keeping them there with these heathen nations, because it would be a constant source of vexation and a constant temptation for them as well. We see this in Judges 2, 20 to 23, and Judges 3, 1 to 4. And in this passage, God makes note of this test 3 times. And we know that the number 3 in the Bible has to do with the purpose of God. All right, Judges 2, 20 to 23. And the anger of Jehovah was hot against Israel, and he said, because that this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may prove Israel, whether they will keep the way of Jehovah to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it or not. Therefore, Jehovah left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. Then chapter 3, verses 1 to 4 of Judges. Now these are the nations which Jehovah left, to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. only that the generations of the children of Israel might know to teach them war, at the least such as before knew nothing thereof, namely 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians, and the Hivites, that dwelt in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon unto the entering in of Hamath. And they were to prove Israel by them. 3rd time he mentions this. To know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of Jehovah, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. All right. The 4th thing that we want to keep in mind is because of Israel's continual transgressions, God arranged that he would drive out the inhabitants of the land, and it's always God that is utilizing his people to do whatever action he wants them to do. They're never doing it on their own. This is always being directed by God himself. But because he wanted to prove them, he does drive the inhabitants out, the remaining inhabitants out of the land little by little. And we read this in Deuteronomy 7:22 and the parallel passage, which is Exodus 23:29 to 30. Deuteronomy 7:22. And Jehovah thy God will put out those nations before thee by little and little. Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee. The other one is Exodus 23:29 to 30. I will not drive them out from before thee in 1 year, lest the land become desolate, and the beast of the field multiply against thee. By little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou be increased and inherit the land. So in these 2 passages, God makes it very clear that as a result of Israel's disobedience, he would not allow them to destroy their enemies at once. Neither would God drive them out in 1 year, which would somehow subject the Israelites to even greater judgment. And that is because the terms, the land becomes desolate, as we're going to see, for example, from Jeremiah 12:10 through 11, and 25:12, both relate spiritually to God's judgment upon the churches and denominations on the one hand, and then on the other hand, upon the rest of the world, as we read in 1 Peter 4:17 and the Old Testament counterpart to 1 Peter 4:17, which is Jeremiah 25:29. Excuse me. Let's look first at Jeremiah 12:10 through 11. Jeremiah 12:10 through 11. And again, we have to keep in mind this has to do with the end of the church age. Many pastors have destroyed my vineyard. They have trodden my portion underfoot. They have made my pleasant portion a desolate, same word, wilderness. They have made it desolate, and being desolate, it mourneth unto me. the whole land is made desolate, because no man layeth it to heart, or no man regardeth it, or considereth it, which is what layeth to heart means. And so again, here we see 4 times in these 2 verses that God is using this word desolate. And it's Strong's number 8077 and also 8076, and the root word, which is 8074. The first desolate is 8077. The second desolate in verse 11 is 8076 and 8077. And then the last desolate is 8074. So he's really driving home the point that there's going to be a judgment. God's judgment is going to fall. And of course, we know from 1 Peter 4:17 that this is exactly, what happened. It began first with the churches and denominations on May 21, 1988, and then it transitions to the rest of the world on May 21, 2011. All right, let's look at Jeremiah 25:12. Jeremiah 25, verse 12. And it shall come, and it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, meaning Babylon, saith Jehovah, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, and will make it perpetual desolations. So here again, the 70 years refers to the second great tribulation period. There's 3 of them in the Bible. The first one was 7 years during the time of Joseph when he was in Egypt. And then the second one was the 70 years when Israel was in Babylon, and they were being ruled over by Nebuchadnezzar, and he's a picture of Satan. And those 70 years are 840 months. The 7 years in Joseph's day are 84 months. And then in our day, the Great Tribulation of our day, which lasted 23 years or 8,400 days. And so all of these are tied into that number 84. And at the end of that 70 years, which typifies May 21, 2011, Satan was defeated, and the world entered into the day of judgment. And we've been here ever since that. And just as Cyrus the Mede came in and without a shot, took over the kingdom of Babylon, in the same way Christ came as a thief in the night, and we've talked about this, as a snare upon the whole world, like it talks about in Luke 21. Because the churches did not believe that he came, and of course the world did not believe he came because they did not see anything at all, and they didn't realize that it was a spiritual judgment which God blanketed the world with. Now, the other expression that we find in Deuteronomy 7:22 and Exodus 23, 29, and 30 is this terminology of the beasts of the field multiplying. And that phrase underscores the spiritual reality that the beasts of the field are actually given to Satan to use, to destroy. We see this in Jeremiah 27:6 and 28:14. Let me read those first. Jeremiah 27:6. And now have I given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And the beasts of the field have I given also to serve him. And then if we go one chapter more, chapter 28, verse 14, for thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, I have put a yoke of iron upon the neck of all these nations, that they may serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And they shall serve him, and I have given him the beasts of the field also. Again, the beasts of the field, as they feed upon dead carcasses, has to do with judgment. And when God allowed Satan to take his seat in the temple, as we read about in 2 Thessalonians 2, and he brought this strong delusion upon the churches and denominations and took away salvation from the churches and denominations as of May 21 in 1988. It was a tremendous judgment, probably the greatest judgment that we have witnessed in the last 2,000 years, other than the fact that we are now living in the day of judgment where in this world there is no more salvation. First, there was no more salvation in the churches, but as of May 21, 2011, there's no more salvation in the world because God has brought in all of his elect. And at this point in time, we are feeding those elect. And we are also declaring to the world that we are, as a matter of fact, living in the day of God's judgment. And it's not, and when Cyrus took over, it's not a benevolent rule. When Christ took over, it's not a benevolent rule at all, because it has to do with the rule of judgment upon the unsaved. It's always a benevolent rule for the believers. We have to always keep that in mind as well. Well, I'm going to read one other passage, and then because of time, we're going to have to continue in our next study. But if we go to Hosea 13, 4 through 8, here we see that God takes personal responsibility for bringing judgment, even as in 2 Thessalonians 2, 11 and 12. And why don't I read that just so that we have that in the back of our minds as well. 2 Thessalonians 2, 11 and 12. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned, who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. In the same way, if we go to Hosea 13, 4 through 8, after Daniel, no, I'm sorry, Daniel, Hosea 13, 4 through 8. Yet I am Jehovah thy God from the land of Egypt, and thou shalt know no God but me, for there is no Savior beside me. I did know thee in the wilderness, in the land of great drought. According to their pasture, so were they filled. They were filled, and their heart was exalted. Therefore have they forgotten me. Therefore I will be unto them as a lion, as a leopard by the way will I observe them. I will meet them as a bear that is bereaved of her whelps, and will rend the caul of their heart. and there will I devour them like a lion, and the wild beast shall tear them. So we see, and this is very gruesome language, but it makes the point that God is bringing his judgment against them. Now, as I said, we're going to have to continue, and Lord willing, I'd like to wrap up speaking about this principle of by little and little in our next lesson, and then we're going to move on, Lord willing, to verse 2 of Judges 1.
Thank you for joining us today for Searching the Scriptures. Until next time, to God be the glory.